Have you ever wondered what someone is truly capable of when they think you'll never come back? That question haunted me from the moment I opened my eyes in the VA hospital. The room was quiet except for the slow beeping of the heart monitor. Each pulse a reminder that I was still alive. Barely. 6 days earlier, a roadside bomb had torn through the convoy I was assigned to in Kosovo. I was airlifted home in a coma, lungs crushed, ribs shattered, and a heart that stopped twice on the operating table. But none of that compared to what I saw when I finally checked my phone. One message, a screenshot of my bank account, completely drained. $64,000. Gone. And beneath it, a message from my wife of 10 years. After everything I've put up with, I deserve this. No hospital visit. No call. Not even a question of whether I'd survive. I didn't reply with anger. I didn't scream or beg for answers. I just sent a single thumbs up emoji. Because in that moment, I wasn't the broken soldier she thought I was. I was already planning how to take everything back and make sure she never saw it coming. My name is Douglas MacArthur, 41 years old, former Army sergeant, now a civilian contractor in military security. I spent the better part of 2 decades serving in war zones most people can't find on a map, not for glory or politics, but because it gave me a purpose. It gave me structure. And when you've seen the worst of humanity, structure is something you hold on to like oxygen. I met Eliza at a fundraiser for veterans' families in San Antonio. She was poised, intelligent, warm in the way that draws people in without trying too hard. She worked in administration at a charter school and spoke about kids like they were the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. I found her idealism magnetic. She found my discipline admirable. We were opposites, and that made the beginning easy. We got married 2 years later. No kids by choice. My life didn't allow for it, and Eliza said she wasn't sure she had the patience. Instead, we bought a house in Austin, quiet neighborhood, big front porch, a fixer-upper with charm. I paid most of the mortgage with the hazard pay and bonuses that came from contracts abroad. Eliza kept things running at home, and for a while it worked. I'd be gone for months, back for a few weeks, then off again. She said she understood, said she admired what I did. In truth, I think she admired the lifestyle more than the man behind it. I noticed the shift slowly over years. At first she was excited every time I came back, the dinners, the smiles, the stories. But as the years stacked up, the reunions grew quieter. Her phone was always near, always buzzing. She stopped asking about the missions, stopped waiting, up for my calls. I chalked it up to the slow erosion that long-distance marriages suffer. After all, I was gone more than I was home. I told myself this was normal. Still, I tried to bridge the distance. I set up joint accounts to make things easier for her. Refinanced the house under both our names when the market dipped. I even started paying into a secondary savings account that we called our Someday Fund. It was money I kept separate from my VA benefits and pension, built up over years, enough to maybe retire early or start a small business when the time came to stop chasing danger overseas. The last year before the explosion, something in me started to itch. I was tired. The nightmares were getting worse. My back felt older than my body. I told Eliza I wanted to cut down my contract work, maybe go part-time, focus more on being present. She smiled and said, "Of course, we'll figure it out." But her eyes didn't match her words. We never argued. That was the thing. No big fights, no slammed doors. Just distance, like watching someone you love turn into a stranger, slowly, enough that you second-guess your instincts. I never expected betrayal. I expected coldness, maybe even resentment. But not theft, not abandonment while I was unconscious in a hospital bed, recovering from a blast that could have easily made her a widow. And certainly not the quiet malice of a message that said, "I earned this." Looking back, it all makes a strange kind of sense. The trips she took for work to places that didn't add up. The credit card she opened just to build rewards points. The sudden interest in managing some of our bills, which she'd previously avoided. All the dots were there, but I never connected them. Because I trusted her. Because she knew I would. It's one thing to be betrayed. It's another to realize the person you loved planned it carefully, waiting for the moment when you were at your weakest. But I'm a soldier, and if she thought I'd lie down and take it, then she never really knew me at all. The blast came on the second week of my final contract rotation. I was stationed outside a private facility in northern Kosovo, part of a logistics advisory team embedded with local security. It was routine until it wasn't. A decoy vehicle drew our attention just long enough for a secondary car, rigged with explosives, to detonate 50 yards away. I don't remember the noise. I just remember the heat, and then the silence. The kind that stretches too long to be sleep. I woke up 6 days later in a military trauma unit back in Virginia. Tubes in my chest, bandages on my ribs, gauze covering the raw skin across my arms. A nurse was at my side, writing something on a chart. She looked up and smiled like I was a miracle. I'd survived a double lung collapse and cardiac arrest. They said my body stopped twice on the medevac flight. Most guys don't come back from that. But I did. What they didn't know was, I woke up to something worse than pain. The silence of abandonment. I reached for my phone with fingers that barely worked. It had been turned off. When I powered it up, there were a few missed messages, mostly from the team, a few military contacts, but only one from Eliza. It was a screenshot of our joint savings account. Balance 0. Below it, just one line. After everything I've put up with, I deserve this. No greeting. No, are you alive? No concern for the fact that I had nearly died in a foreign country while trying to get home to her. Just that sentence. Cold. Final. I stared at it, waiting for the fury to rise. But it didn't. Maybe I was still too medicated. Maybe I was just too tired. The kind of tired that goes past physical. The kind that settles deep in your bones. So I did the only thing I could manage. I replied with a thumbs up emoji, not because I was okay with it, but because I knew something she didn't. I wasn't coming back to her. And I wasn't coming back broken. I didn't tell the doctors what I was planning. I played the role, said all the right things about rest and recovery, nodded when they said I'd need to avoid stress and physical activity for at least 8 weeks. I promised to follow their orders. They assumed I'd be going home to a supportive spouse and a quiet place to heal. I had no intention of setting foot in that house again. At least not yet. Instead, I made a quiet call from the hospital bed to my older sister Amelia. We hadn't spoken regularly in years. Our lives had moved in different directions. Mine toward war, hers into the law. She was a public defender now, fiercely smart and unflinchingly loyal. I didn't even have to finish my sentence before she said, "You're not staying with her. Come to me." The next morning, with the discharge papers in hand and a cane in mine, I took a cab straight to Amelia's apartment in Arlington. It was modest, full of case files and half-read legal journals, but it felt like a bunker. Safe, private, quiet. Amelia didn't ask many questions at first, just helped me into bed, brought me something to eat, and let me rest. But when I finally told her what happened, showed her the screenshot, the expression on her face shifted from shock to something else, something colder. Calculated. She knew you were in the hospital? She sent the message 2 days before. I woke up. Amelia didn't say anything for a long time, then she stood up and said, "We're not letting this go." I didn't realize until then how badly I needed someone to say that. I'd been willing to let it all disappear, to write it off as a hard lesson learned. But Amelia wasn't wired that way. She wasn't going to let Eliza walk away with everything. Not after what she'd done. And just like that, I stopped being a victim and started being a man with a mission. I spent the next few days resting, healing, watching the world through the narrow lens of my sister's apartment window. Every time I tried to picture the woman I'd married, I saw a stranger, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard that single line like a drumbeat in my skull. I deserve this. She had taken my money. Now I was going to take back my dignity and the life she tried to erase. The first week out of the hospital was a blur of sleep, silence, and staring at the ceiling fan in Amelia's spare room. My body ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. Every breath was shallow, every step deliberate. But it wasn't the physical pain that kept me from sleeping. It was the slow, suffocating realization that everything I'd believed in, everything I'd built with Eliza, had been a lie. Not a sudden betrayal, but a patient one. Quiet. Surgical. I kept going back to that message. Not just the words, but the tone. It wasn't anger. It wasn't desperation. It was entitlement. As if I owed her something for surviving. As if my time overseas and my long nights of pain and duty were just collateral in a deal I didn't know I'd signed. She hadn't panicked when I was gone. She'd prepared. I thought about all the nights I'd called her from war zones with shaky satellite signals, telling her I was safe, that I missed her, that I'd be home soon. I remembered the warmth in her voice. Was it ever real? Or was she just waiting for the next deposit, the next absence, the next opportunity? Amelia tiptoed around me those first few days, giving me space. But I could feel her watching, assessing the damage like a field medic. She saw it all. The bruised ego, the fractured trust, the quiet grief I hadn't yet admitted to myself. One night, she came in with tea and sat at the edge of the bed. She didn't just steal your money, Doug, she stole your time. Your belief in her, that's worse. I nodded barely. She was right. The money could be earned back. But the years, the loyalty, that quiet sense of home I thought I'd built with Eliza, gone. Still, I couldn't afford to wallow. The army taught me that. When the roof collapses, you don't sit in the rubble, you assess, you adapt, you move. So I started asking questions. Not out loud, not yet, just in my head. When did it start? How long had she been pulling away? How much had I missed? I remembered the canceled vacations, the time she forgot my birthday, the work trips she never explained. Once I'd found a receipt for a spa weekend in San Antonio when she'd told me she was at a conference in Houston. She brushed it off, said it was a gift from her boss. I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. My body needed rest, but my mind began to pace. I couldn't sleep more than 4 hours at a time. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, jaw clenched, fists curled like I was still on patrol. The PTSD I'd managed for years started roaring again, not from combat, but from betrayal. This wasn't the kind of pain a therapist could untangle with breathing exercises and mantras. This was the kind of wound that needed action. Amelia sensed the shift. One afternoon, she brought in her laptop and sat beside me. I started looking into the account withdrawals. There are patterns. Transfers she made while you were overseas, all timed right after your monthly deposits. She showed me spreadsheets, digital paper trails. Eliza hadn't just emptied our account during the hospital stay. She'd been funneling funds into another bank for months. Small amounts, but consistent. Just enough to stay off the radar. Just enough to build an escape. My hands tightened around the blanket. It was methodical, planned, premeditated. That was the moment I stopped grieving and started thinking tactically. Not like a husband, but like a soldier again. She knew I was gone. She thought I'd stay gone, I said quietly. She underestimated. You, Amelia replied. That night I sat alone in the dark, scrolling through old text messages, photos, bank alerts. Every memory now had a shadow, a timestamp that meant something else. I wasn't trying to feel sorry for myself. I was gathering intel, because when someone strips you of your peace, your trust, your sense of home, there are only two choices: collapse or rebuild smarter. I wasn't going to collapse, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let her think I'd disappeared. By the second week, I was out of bed and walking again, slowly but steadily, the cane more of a formality than a necessity. The burns on my arms were healing, and my lungs didn't protest with every breath. My mind, though, that was the sharpest it had been in years. Something about betrayal cuts through the fog of trauma. You stop thinking like a patient and start thinking like a strategist. Amelia and I transformed her small kitchen into an improvised operations center. Her dining table disappeared under stacks of financial statements, printouts from my accounts, and notes pinned to legal pads. She taught me how to request records, pull data from dormant email accounts, and quietly monitor transactions from the back end. It was tedious, but it gave me control. And for someone who'd nearly died with none, that control felt like oxygen. The deeper we dug, the uglier the truth became. The first red flag came from a joint credit card, one we rarely used. I'd assumed it sat idle. But Eliza had been charging weekend getaways, spa treatments, and boutique hotel stays under innocuous labels. Staff enrichment conference, curriculum symposium. Except the dates didn't line up with any events we could verify. One reservation at a beachfront condo in Corpus Christi stood out. It was a full week. I was deployed in Turkey at the time. During a mission I remember vividly because I'd called her on our anniversary. She hadn't picked up. Then came the private transfers. Eliza had opened an LLC under the name ED Educational Solutions. The bank listed her as the sole member. At first glance, it looked like a side consulting business, but it had no website, no clients, no presence. It existed for one thing: to funnel money from our joint savings account into a business operations fund one she alone could access. And she had been doing it for months, in increments just under federal reporting thresholds. All told, over $28,000 had disappeared this way. It wasn't just betrayal, it was financial engineering. She was building her exit plan, Amelia said, pushing a set of statements toward me. And she thought the best time to finish it was while you were unconscious in a hospital. But what chilled me more than the money was the man. His name came up first in a hotel guest list attached to one of her charges: Philip Carter. I didn't recognize the name, but a quick search told me enough. Owner of a boutique gym in downtown Austin, 35, divorced. Former personal trainer at the same charter school where Eliza worked. I found a photo of him on the gym's site. Sleek, confident, the kind of polished charm you see on motivational podcasts. I showed Amelia the photo. Her face tightened. That's the guy who signed for the beach condo. His name is on the lease. So, while I was deployed, Eliza had been vacationing with someone else, using our money, staying in property that was now in both their names. It was a special kind of humiliation, one you don't scream about or cry over. It just settles in your chest like cold stone. And yet it clarified everything. This wasn't a mistake or an affair fueled by loneliness. This was calculated. She had used my absence as cover and my trust as fuel. The next step was surveillance. I wasn't interested in confrontation. I wanted proof. So Amelia helped me set up discreet tracking. We installed monitoring on our shared digital accounts, reviewed property tax records, even quietly requested security footage from our neighborhood HOA using a lawyer's letterhead. The camera facing our driveway confirmed what I already suspected. Philip had been staying at my house, driving my car, walking the dog I'd rescued from a roadside base in Kandahar. And Eliza? She walked next to him like none of it was borrowed, like it all belonged to her now. But here's the thing, she never touched the deed to the house. During our refinancing the year before, I'd handled the paperwork myself because her schedule was too hectic. Since I had the better credit and the VA loan, the title had gone solely into my name. At the time it felt like a technicality, now it felt like a lifeline. I still owned the house and she didn't know I remembered that. One night I sat across from Amelia and asked, "How do we do this right? I don't want revenge for the sake of it. I want this done legally, airtight." She nodded. "Then we bring in someone who can fight on paper as hard as you fought overseas." The next morning, she made a call to Shane Lee, a civil litigator she'd worked with on a veterans' housing discrimination case. He was sharp, relentless, and not afraid of messy battles. Within days, Shane was at the apartment, reviewing the documentation we'd collected. "Looks like you've been building a case without even knowing it," he said, impressed. "What she's done may not be strictly illegal in isolation, but The context, the timing, the abuse of access during medical incapacity, that changes everything. I sat back, chest aching, not from injury, but from something like vindication. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. And I wasn't just a victim. I was a man with leverage. Once Shane Lee stepped in, everything changed. The emotional weight I'd been carrying started to shift, not because it was lighter, but because it had direction. Shane was one of those lawyers who never raised his voice but made every word feel like a verdict. Former JAG officer, clean-cut, efficient and armed with a kind of intellectual quiet that people tend to mistake for passivity, until he starts talking. And then it's too late. The first thing he did was map out a timeline, something the military had drilled into me, but that I'd somehow forgotten in the chaos of betrayal. We plotted every deposit, every suspicious transfer, every travel record, tied to Eliza's fabricated conferences. Then we layered in hospital records proving the exact hours I was unconscious post-surgery. The withdrawals, as Shane put it, weren't just shady, they were surgically timed. From there, he got aggressive. Shane filed a formal notice of intent to pursue civil charges for financial exploitation against Eliza, requesting an immediate freeze on all joint assets, including the accounts tied to her shell LLC. But the real chess move came when he filed for an emergency injunction on the house, my house. The legal brief argued that due to the unique conditions of my medical incapacitation and the fraudulent use of shared funds, I was entitled not only to exclusive possession of the property, but to full control over any shared assets pending a formal hearing. It was bold, and it worked. A judge signed off on the temporary freeze within 48 hours. While the legal gears began to turn, Shane advised one thing above all: silence. No texting her. No responding if she reaches out. From this point forward, she talks through me, he said. You're not angry. You're not emotional. You're not reacting. You're moving. It felt like training all over again. Controlled breathing, measured steps, no unnecessary exposure. But that didn't mean I wasn't watching. One morning, while sipping coffee at Amelia's, I got a call from my neighbor back in Austin, Curtis, the retired firefighter who'd always helped shovel the walk when I was deployed. Hey, Doug. I don't want to stir anything up, but there's been this guy staying at your place. Not sure if you're renting it out. But he's been there every night for the past few weeks. Drives a white Audi, kinda slick. I thanked him and hung up. No explanation needed. Philip. The same man who'd been parading through my life like a ghost with a credit card. Later that week, I drove by the house. I stayed 2 blocks away, parked with the engine off, windows cracked. The house looked exactly as I remembered, but it felt foreign, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. I noticed small changes, new planters by the door, a different porch light, fresh tire tracks in the driveway. That's when it hit me. They thought they'd won. They thought I wouldn't come back. Or if I did, it would be quietly, broken, limping toward closure. But I was here, and I wasn't just back. I was 3 steps ahead. That night I made 3 phone calls. First, to the private security company I had worked for in Kosovo. I needed employment verification documents to prove I'd been deployed. Second, to the VA hospital, requesting certified records of my surgery and sedation timeline. Third, to a private investigator Shane recommended, quiet, discreet, effective. I didn't want photos of Philip with Eliza for drama's sake. I wanted timestamps, locations, evidence. Within 10 days, I had them. Receipts of joint meals charged to Eliza's secondary card. Surveillance stills showing her and Philip entering a real estate office together. Turns out they were shopping for another property in San Marcos, a small investment property, likely meant to be their nest egg, funded by my sacrifice. But the most telling photo was the simplest. Philip taking out the trash at my house wearing my hoodie, one I'd bought during my first deployment. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't make me angry. It made me surgical. I sent everything to Shane. He responded within the hour. This is more than enough. Time to move. He filed for a formal hearing in Travis County, citing medical exploitation, marital fraud, and improper use of shared funds. At the same time, Amelia drafted a personal statement as a character witness, documenting my post-recovery behavior and the extent of Eliza's financial isolation tactics. Meanwhile, the house, the one she was decorating like it belonged to her, the court granted me temporary exclusive use. Within 72 hours, Eliza received a notice to vacate or respond with a legal objection. Her response came quickly, not in court, but in a text. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Doug. We can fix this. You're acting like a stranger." I didn't reply. A day later. "You don't understand everything I've sacrificed. You think you're the only one who's been hurt in this marriage." Still, no response. 3 days later. "You can't. Just hide behind lawyers. You owe me a conversation." "No, Eliza, what I owed you was trust, and you cashed it in when you thought I wouldn't wake up." A week later, Shane got a call from Eliza's new lawyer, Patricia Wells. Her name was familiar in Austin legal circles. Known for being aggressive, especially in divorce proceedings, with a reputation for leaving her client's spouse's scorched earth broke. It meant one thing: Eliza was preparing for war. Shane didn't blink. "She's playing offense now because she sees the wall closing in. Let her come. We've got enough evidence to drown them both in paperwork." The final move came when the private investigator found something unexpected. Philip wasn't just Eliza's boyfriend. He had a criminal history, credit fraud, tax evasion, and a suspended license to operate personal training services due to harassment complaints. The kicker? He'd been sued 2 years prior for identity theft, settled out of court. When we tied his name to the Shell LLC accounts, Shane smiled for the first time since we'd started. "Congratulations. We're no longer dealing with just a messy divorce. We're dealing with a potential criminal conspiracy." What began as a betrayal was now a case file stacked with enough documentation to show a premeditated plan to drain, isolate, and replace me. The pieces were finally in place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming everything they tried to bury me with. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. A scent I'd once associated with military admin buildings now marked the battlefield for what came next. Shane walked beside me, calm as ever, clutching a leather folder filled with printouts, affidavits, and evidence, the kind of quiet arsenal that didn't make noise until it landed on a judge's desk. Amelia was in the row behind me, unreadable, but I could feel her conviction like armor on my back. I hadn't seen Eliza in almost 3 months, and I'd thought I was ready for it. I wasn't. She walked into the courtroom with her head high and her posture flawless, wearing the same navy blue blazer she used to wear when she asked me to fund her professional development conferences. Her hair curled, nails done, lips painted, with a deliberate shade of sympathy. And next to her, like some parody of sincerity, stood Philip, shoulders back, confident, dressed like he'd seen one courtroom drama and thought that was enough. I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes. Their lawyer, Patricia Wells, entered with the energy of someone who'd already written the ending. Her expression was polite but dismissive, the kind reserved for men like me, damaged, recovering, presumed desperate. The judge was a tall man in his 60s, gray-haired, glasses perched low on his nose, the kind of presence that made everyone sit straighter. Judge Alton. Reputation. Fair but no patience for games. We started with Shane's opening. No theatrics, just facts. He walked the court through my hospitalization, the records confirming I was sedated and medically incapacitated. He then showed the withdrawals, tens of thousands in coordinated transfers, executed during my coma. He submitted the paper trail tracing funds into a business account controlled by Eliza, and linked that account to a lease on a luxury condo shared with Philip Carter. No speculation, just ink and timestamp. Then he presented the photos. Philip in my hoodie. Philip on my porch. Philip holding my dog. But the one that changed the temperature in the room was the lease agreement with both Eliza's and Philip's names on it, dated 2 weeks before my discharge from the hospital. They weren't just living together. They were investing together. When it was Patricia Wells' turn, she adjusted her glasses and went with a familiar angle. Spin the narrative. She claimed Eliza had endured years of emotional abandonment, that I was detached, volatile, and obsessed with my work, that she had reason to believe our marriage had collapsed long before the money was moved. And then came the weaponized sympathy. Your Honor, my client had every reason to protect herself financially. Mr. MacArthur's work placed him in high-risk zones. There was no certainty he would return. The funds in question were jointly accessible. She simply ensured her stability while fearing the worst. Judge Alton glanced over his glasses. While he was in a coma? She was under extreme emotional duress, Patricia replied quickly. Shane stood again. Your Honor, if I may. He pulled out the final piece, something he hadn't even told me he would use. It was a video, a clip from a traffic camera near the house. It showed Eliza and Philip loading furniture into a U-Haul on the same day she had transferred the final $12,000 from our savings. She was laughing. Philip kissed her on the cheek. No signs of grief, no signs of duress, just two people moving in together. The judge leaned back, folding his hands. Mrs. MacArthur, he said, voice sharp but calm. When your husband lay unconscious from battlefield injuries, you began transferring funds into a private business, signed a lease with another man, and removed furniture from the marital home. You're asserting this was due to emotional strain. Eliza stood, voice steady but thinner than I remembered. Your Honor, I thought he wasn't coming back. I panicked. I didn't plan to take everything, But you did, he interrupted. And you continued to do so even after he recovered. You never contacted him to discuss financial decisions. Instead, you tried to replace him. And from what I've seen, you used marital resources to do it. She went quiet. Philip shifted in his seat, but the judge didn't look at him. He turned to me. Mr. MacArthur, your request for a freeze on assets and exclusive use of the home is granted. Additionally, pending the divorce proceedings, I am granting temporary control of all disputed accounts to your counsel. We will hold an evidentiary hearing to determine if further civil penalties apply. He looked at Patricia Wells. I strongly recommend your client prepare for discovery because what I've seen thus far suggests premeditated financial deception, possibly even criminal. The gavel didn't slam, it simply tapped, but the sound reverberated. As we stood, Eliza turned to look at me. For the first time since that hospital message, her eyes didn't carry triumph or detachment. They carried fear, not of me, of consequence. Outside the courthouse, Shane let out a breath. That was just the prelude, he said. Next comes discovery. That's where the fun begins. I didn't smile. I wasn't gloating. I felt still, like after a storm when the world looks the same but everything's shifted. I hadn't won, not yet, but I had made it clear. I wasn't the man she could erase, and I never would be again. The months that followed the courtroom hearing moved slowly, like the final chapter of a long deployment. The adrenaline had faded, but the work wasn't over. Shane filed for full financial disclosure, and as discovery unfolded, so did the rest of the truth. Eliza's spending habits, previously hidden behind shell transfers and vague statements, were laid bare. The condo she and Philip had leased was paid for entirely out of marital funds, some directly from my deployment bonuses. There were shopping sprees, spa packages, and wire transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands registered under her fake business. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was embezzlement dressed in domesticity. Shane moved swiftly. He leveraged her cooperation in exchange for not referring the financial abuse to the district attorney's office. She agreed to return the majority of the funds, 75% of the shared assets, plus all proceeds from the resale of the condo, which she quietly abandoned when the truth became public record. Philip disappeared shortly after the discovery phase began. He sold his gym to a partner and moved out of state. Whether Eliza followed him or not, I never cared to find out. I moved back into my house 2 weeks after the judge's ruling. The porch looked just as I remembered it, though it felt emptier without my dog, who I later found at a shelter after Philip apparently surrendered him. That reunion, unlike all the others, was simple. No drama, just a tail wag, and the kind of forgiveness only animals can give freely. The house was quiet, dustier, but it was mine, not just legally, but emotionally. I walked from room to room that first night, touching the door frames, the light switches, as if to confirm they still belonged to me. The photos of Eliza were long gone. So was the energy she brought, the curated calm of her control. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was clarity. I spent the next few weeks fixing what had been neglected: light fixtures, garden beds, a broken cabinet door. I mended the house like I was mending myself. Every nail I hammered felt like I was staking a claim not just to the property, but to the life I had almost lost. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I slept through the night. The divorce was finalized faster than anyone predicted. Eliza didn't contest the split. She didn't demand alimony. In the end, she got her car, some personal items, and 25% of what was left in the joint accounts. She also had to pay my legal fees out of her share, a detail Shane fought hard for. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final conversation, just a signature on paper and a courier envelope delivered through her attorney, and that was it. After 20 months of war, 10 years of marriage, and one silent betrayal, it ended with silence. I didn't feel triumphant, just done. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I sold the house 6 months later. Too many ghosts in the hallway. Too many mornings where I'd reach for coffee and remember she used to leave notes on the fridge, some sweet, some passive-aggressive, all written by a version of her that no longer existed. With the proceeds from the sale and what I recovered from the settlement, I bought a smaller place just outside San Marcos, close to Amelia and the friends who'd shown up when it mattered. I used part of the money to help Amelia's son Josh pay for his college tuition, and I donated a sizable portion to a veteran mental health foundation that helped me through the first nights after discharge, when the nightmares were loudest. I stopped doing contract work altogether. My lungs couldn't take the altitude anymore, and frankly, neither could my soul. Instead, I took a position with a logistics firm in Austin that worked directly with the VA, helping newly discharged service members transition into civilian employment. It was quieter work, predictable, but there's a dignity in that too. Coming home at 5, cooking your own dinner, being able to sleep without your boots near the bed. People often ask if I'm angry about what happened, if I regret not seeing the sign sooner. I tell them no. Anger fades. Regret lingers only if you let it. What I feel most is gratitude, not for what I went through, but for what I walked away from. Eliza didn't just take money, she took illusions. And in stripping away everything that wasn't real, she made space for something better. She thought she was ending my life. What she really did was give me a reason to rebuild it, on my terms, with my eyes open, and without needing anyone else's permission to stand up and start again. What happened to Douglas MacArthur isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a warning. A reminder that emotional manipulation often hides behind polite smiles and that financial exploitation doesn't always come with forged checks or stolen wallets. Sometimes it comes from the person sleeping beside you. In the eyes of the law, cases like Douglas's are rare, not because they don't happen, but because they're hard to prove. Spouses have access. Trust blurs boundaries. And the victim is often too ashamed to speak up, especially when they're trained to be strong, silent, and self-reliant, as so many veterans are. But Douglas's story also shows us something else. Justice doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it shows up in court transcripts, evidence binders, and quiet rulings that no one claps for. But that change lives nonetheless. He didn't burn it all down. He built something better. If you've ever been in a situation where trust was weaponized against you, remember, you're not alone, and silence is not strength. Action is. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Douglas's shoes? And, if this story made you stop and think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit where it matters.